What if the government could reach inside your mind? Not with force, not with a gun, but with a pill, a whisper, and a few weeks of carefully engineered terror. What if they already did? Somewhere in a CIA archive, there is a folder that was never meant to be found. It contains records of experiments conducted on human beings, without their consent, without their knowledge, and without mercy. The program had a name, MKUltra, and for over 2 decades, it operated in the shadows of American democracy, funded by taxpayer money, authorized by the highest levels of government, and buried so thoroughly that to this day, the full truth remains unknown. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is documented history. To understand how something like this could happen, you have to understand the world that created it. It is 1950. The Cold War has begun. The Soviet Union has the atomic bomb. China has fallen to communism. And Washington is gripped by a fear so deep, so irrational, and yet so real, that it would push the United States government to abandon every principle it claimed to stand for. The fear was this: what if the enemy could control the human mind? It wasn't science fiction. American prisoners of war returning from Korea were displaying disturbing behavior. They were confessing to crimes they hadn't committed, renouncing their country, parroting communist ideology with strange, robotic conviction. The CIA called it brainwashing, and they believed the Soviets had cracked the code. They decided they needed to crack it first. On April 13, 1953, CIA Director Allen Dulles quietly authorized a covert program unlike anything the United States government had ever undertaken. It was given the code name MKUltra. Its stated goal: to develop techniques for mind control, behavior modification, and the extraction of information from unwilling subjects. Its real goal was something far darker. The program was placed under the command of a chemist named Sidney Gottlieb, a man described by colleagues as brilliant, eccentric, and utterly without moral hesitation. Gottlieb believed that the key to controlling the human mind lay in breaking it first. And he had a tool he was convinced could do exactly that: LSD. In the early 1950s, lysergic acid diethylamide was barely known outside of a few European research laboratories. The CIA obtained large quantities and began testing it, not on volunteers, not in controlled settings, but on people who had no idea what was happening to them. Mental patients, prisoners, drug addicts, sex workers, people who had no power, no voice, and no protection. The agency set up what were essentially safe houses, in New York, in San Francisco, run through front organizations. They hired prostitutes to lure men off the streets, bring them back to these apartments, and slip LSD into their drinks. CIA operatives would then watch through two-way mirrors, taking notes, observing the psychological disintegration of people who thought they were simply having a drink. The operation was called MKUltra Sub-Project 3. Internally, they called it Operation Midnight Climax. Let that sink in. These men had no idea they were participants in a government experiment. Some were traumatized for years. We do not know all of their names. We do not know what happened to many of them. Their files were destroyed. But LSD was only one tool in the arsenal. MKUltra comprised at least 150 separate sub-projects. Researchers, many of them university professors working under CIA-funded grants, experimented with electroconvulsive therapy pushed far beyond any therapeutic limits. Sleep deprivation lasting weeks. Sensory isolation so extreme that subjects began hallucinating within hours. Hypnosis. Psychological humiliation. Combinations of drugs administered in cocktails designed to induce total psychological collapse. The program also drew directly from the work of Nazi scientists, a fact the CIA was fully aware of and deliberately concealed. Some techniques bore an uncomfortable resemblance to what had been practiced at Dachau and Auschwitz. The moral architecture was different, the ideology was different, but the fundamental premise was the same. Some human beings could be used as instruments. One of the most disturbing sub-projects was run by a Scottish-born psychiatrist named Dr. Ewan Cameron at McGill University in Montreal, Canada. Cameron called his technique psychic driving. His patients, many of them admitted to his clinic voluntarily, suffering from depression and anxiety, were placed into medically induced comas lasting weeks or even months. During this time, they were subjected to continuous tape loop recordings, sometimes playing the same message thousands of times, designed to overwrite their existing beliefs and replace them with new ones. Some patients were given massive doses of LSD and electroconvulsive shocks at 30 to 40 times the normal therapeutic intensity. The results were not breakthroughs. They were catastrophe. Patients emerged unable to remember their own names, unable to recognize their families, regressed to the mental state of infants. Some never recovered. Cameron was funded by the CIA through a front organization. He won awards. He was celebrated in his field. He died in 1967, having never been prosecuted for anything. And then there is Frank Olson. In November 1953, a U.S. Army biological warfare scientist named Frank Olson was given LSD without his knowledge, slipped into a glass of Cointreau at a CIA retreat in rural Maryland. He was not told what had happened to him until afterward. In the days that followed, Olson became deeply disturbed. He was taken to New York City, where he was staying at the Statler Hotel under CIA supervision. On the morning of November 28, 1953, Frank Olson fell from the window of his 10th floor hotel room and died on the street below. The CIA called it suicide. For 20 years, his family believed it too. Then, in 1975, the Church Committee investigations into CIA abuses cracked open the archive. The Olson family learned for the first time what had been done to him. They exhumed his body in 1994. Forensic experts found a hematoma on his skull inconsistent with a fall. The New York City medical examiner reclassified his death as a homicide. No one was ever charged. The unraveling of MKUltra began in 1973, when CIA Director Richard Helms, anticipating congressional investigations, ordered the destruction of all MKUltra files. Thousands of documents were shredded. An entire chapter of American history was fed into machines and turned to dust. But the agency made a mistake. A batch of files, roughly 20,000 documents, had been misfiled in a financial records building outside of CIA headquarters. They survived, and in 1977, they were discovered during a Freedom of Information Act request filed by journalist John Marks. The Senate held hearings. Survivors testified. The nation watched in stunned silence as CIA Director Stansfield Turner sat before Congress and confirmed what had been, until that moment, unthinkable, that the United States government had systematically conducted mind control experiments on its own citizens without their consent for over 2 decades. President Ford issued an executive order prohibiting such experiments in the future. No one went to prison. Here is what we still do not know. We do not know the full scope of MKUltra because the records were destroyed. What survived is, by definition, only what they failed to eliminate. We do not know how many people were experimented on. Estimates range from hundreds to thousands. We do not know how many died, or how many spent the rest of their lives silently damaged by what was done to them. We do not know whether every sub-project was ever fully catalogued. And we do not know with certainty that programs like this have never been resumed under different names, different authorizations, different levels of classification. What we know is this: it happened, it was real, it was official, and it was hidden for as long as they could hide it. We like to believe that the architecture of democracy, oversight, courts, the press, the conscience of elected officials, makes the truly monstrous impossible. MKUltra is the evidence that this belief requires constant, vigilant protection. Because the program didn't emerge from villains twirling mustaches in dark rooms. It emerged from earnest men who believed they were protecting their country. It emerged from bureaucratic systems designed to keep secrets from the very people those systems were meant to serve. And somewhere in the distance between what we are told and what is classified, between what was destroyed and what was never written down, the question lingers. Not just what happened, but what we still don't know, and whether we ever will.